Hi, everybody. Welcome to our event tonight. Welcome to the University of the District of Columbia School of Law. I am Jennifer Laskin, a 1L and the co-chair of the National Lawyers Guild. And I'd like to officially welcome you all to our program, Can an Undocumented Immigrant Become an Attorney? And also share a little something about where you are and who our sponsors are this evening. This event is important to me personally because I worked within the DREAM movement as a high school teacher and community organizer before coming to law school. 10 years ago, high school students were living in the shadows of their own documentation and their own status. They were afraid to come out, they were afraid to say who they were and what they stood for, where their parents came from, because of people like Cesar Vargas, who went through college, paying dollar by dollar with no financial aid, very little community support, and even in some states, community awareness. These DREAM students organized politically and socially, state by state, for in-state tuition, and also created and built a strong movement for the federal DREAM Act. And it is Cesar's generation of dreamers who blazed a trail for high school dream clubs to now exist all over the country. And it is Cesar's generation of dreamers who I believe are my activist generation freedom fighters. And Cesar, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you. The mission of the University of the District of Columbia David A. Clark School of Law is to recruit and enroll students from groups underrepresented at the bar, to provide a well-rounded theoretical and practical legal education that will enable students to be effective and ethical advocates and represent the legal needs of low-income District of Columbia residents through the school's legal clinics. We are the most diverse law school in the nation. 50% of our students are members of minority groups. 55% of our students are women. The average age of our students is 29. The National Lawyers Guild, one of your sponsoring organizations tonight, is dedicated to the need for basic change in the structure of our political and economic system. We seek to unite the lawyers, law students, legal workers, and jailhouse lawyers to function as an effective force in the service of the people to the end that human rights shall be regarded as more sacred than property interests. And our website is nlg.org. Thank you to our legal community co-sponsors, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, the Hispanic National Bar Association, the Hispanic Bar Association of the District of Columbia. And thank you to the student government of UDC David A. Clark School of Law for helping us put this event on. I'm happy now to introduce Aisha Ching, the president of the Latino Law Students Association, our other co-sponsoring organization, who will introduce our speakers and our program for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Good evening, everyone. And once again, welcome to the David A. Clark School of Law. On behalf of the UDC chapter of the Latino Law Student Association and the National Lawyers Guild chapter here, I thank you for taking time out of your night to come and join us for this great event. Once again, I would like to take a moment to thank our co-sponsors, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, the Hispanic National Bar Association, the Hispanic Bar Association of the District of Columbia, and the student government for allowing us to put this event together. Now, as you've already heard, UDC's mission statement, I won't repeat myself, but I will give you a little bit of an insight for UDC LALSA's mission. Our mission is, among other things, to collaborate with other student organizations to discuss pertinent legal issues. And as we all know, immigration policy reform is one of the issues at the forefront of our current political discussion. And that's what we're here to discuss today. Can an undocumented immigrant become a lawyer? With us here today, we have our resident immigration expert, Professor Kristina Campbell, and a dream lawyer, Mr. Cesar Vargas. And I will now introduce our moderator, Mr. Fernando Rivero, who will later on introduce our keynote speakers. Mr. Rivero received his JD from Georgetown University Law Center in 1998. He has been an Assistant Attorney General at the Office of the Attorney General for the District of Columbia since 2005. He currently practices civil prosecution in the Attorney General's Civil Enforcement Section, representing approximately a dozen government agencies enforcing their legal mandates through litigation in Superior Court, the Office of Administrative Hearings, and various boards and commissions. Prior to working at the Attorney General's office, Mr. Rivero was Chief of Staff and Legislative Counsel to Council Member Jim Graham in the Council of the District of Columbia. Now, in addition to all of those great accomplishments, Mr. Rivero has been an active member of the Hispanic Bar Association of the District of Columbia since the late 1990s and is currently serving as President-elect. He chairs the Hispanic National Bar Association's Dream Initiative Task Force. So who better to be our moderator, right? So please join me in welcoming Mr. Fernando Rivero.
Thank you very much. Is this thing on?
Press the push button.
Okay. I'm not really accustomed to mics because people know that I can project a bit, but I understand that I'm being recorded for posterity, so I'm going to indulge the microphone here. Thank you everybody for showing up today. I am very pleased to be here, and on behalf of the Hispanic Bar Association of DC, and also on behalf of the Hispanic National Bar Association, I welcome you all to this event. As you know, this is an issue that bears a great deal on the work that both of the Hispanic Bar Associations do. So I'm going to do a little quick plug to get that out of the way and move on with our program. The Hispanic National Bar Association has a Dream Initiative program or project which was just mentioned, and I do chair that. And that project has to do with promoting a model resolution at the state legislature level. We have been knocking on the front door of Congress for years. They're not listening, or they would have passed the DREAM Act years ago. So we're going to go in the back door, if you will. We're going to generate grassroots pressure from the bottom up in the form of legislative resolutions passed by the states. There's a handout that was prepared today that is essentially the model resolution with talking points about the DREAM Act. Today's event will not bear directly on the DREAM Act, but if the DREAM Act had passed already, we wouldn't have this event today, because Mr. Vargas would not have this challenge before him. So those of you who are interested in discussing this project after the event, I'd be happy to do that as well. HNBA does have a mid-year conference in Atlanta, and we also have many more projects that you can look at hnba.com. Those of you who are interested in being a member of the HBADC, the address is hbadc.org. And tomorrow, in fact, at the American University School of Law, there will be the 16th Annual Hispanic Law Conference. And you can look that up on the web as well. Many of us will be there, and the topic addressed there would be essentially the changing legal landscape for lawyers, with a view to the challenges in employment that lawyers are facing today. So there's a lot going on. But having said that, I will move now to introduce our participants for today's event. We have in the center ring Mr. Cesar Vargas, who is born in Staten Island, and he came from, his family came from Mexico, and he did come from Mexico when he was actually 5 years old. He grew up in New York. He graduated from the CUNY School of Law with a 3.7 grade point average, no less, passed the bar exam, mailed his application to the bar, only one problem, and that problem has to do with his immigration status right now. The decision is up to a committee of the New York State's Supreme Court Appellate Division in Brooklyn. If accepted, Mr. Vargas would be the state's, and perhaps even the country's, first lawyer without legal immigration status. We will discuss later in the program that there are apparently now 3 individuals in this very unique situation throughout the country. But he may have to argue his case in court first. He once dreamed of becoming a military lawyer or a prosecutor. Now he's thinking of starting his own firm. He has joined with other undocumented law graduates in what is known as the Dream Bar Association, and the organization has a website that they're currently developing as well. And next to Mr. Vargas is Professor Campbell. She is a career public interest attorney specializing in civil rights litigation on behalf of immigrants and low-wage workers. Kristina began her career in 2002 as a staff attorney with a statewide farm worker program at the Central Virginia Legal Aid Society in Charlottesville, Virginia. And in 2004, she joined the statewide farm worker program at Community Legal Services in Phoenix, Arizona, as a staff attorney. From 2006 to 2009, Kristina was a staff attorney with the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund in Los Angeles, California. A little footnote here, Maldiv has also been involved in litigating a couple of the cases that have to do with Mr. Vargas' own situation. And at Maldiv, Kristina engaged in impact litigants' rights litigation in both Arizona and California. So I'd like a little round of applause for our participants today. And we will start the program with Mr. Vargas giving us some remarks about his experiences, and after Mr. Vargas' presentation, we will move forward to the panel portion of the event. Take it away.
Thank you so much. First, Daffy, thank you so much for everybody for welcoming me. I want to thank everyone here. I want to thank UDC. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Mami, and everybody who has really put this great event together. And I've always really loved speaking at law schools, especially public interest law schools. And I'm actually going to be speaking at NYU and Brooklyn Law, but it's always great to speak in public interest law school, especially because we all have the same mission. And of course, I love speaking in law school because I got to experience both, well, at least reminisce the torture of law school, but also the great experiences that I enjoyed there. But I think it's a really great place to have the discussion on undocumented lawyers and immigration in general in our nation's capital. There's definitely a distinction between the issue of immigration, and we need to dissect what the issue is before we understand what it means to be an undocumented lawyer and the legal issues around it. Because in that major issue, we have not only the legal issues, but we have the policy issues, as well as the stories that make up the issue. We all read cases all the time. I'm sure sometimes you're all sick of outlining and so forth. But within the cases, the stories of people. And in immigration, it's no less different. It's about my story, the story of dreamers, my story of coming into the U.S. when I was 5 years old, and the story of my mother taking the brave decision after my father passed away when I was only 3 years old. She made a courageous decision to come to the U.S., not to break laws, not to take American jobs, not to steal anything less. You know, we've been hearing the rhetoric. She came pretty much to really give me a chance of the American dream, as well as the stories of people who I've met along the way when I used to work in restaurants when I was 12 years old to pretty much help my mother. It was about working, going to school, and being reminded that school is very important. It was about me knowing that even though I had to work as a waiter, as a dishwasher, it means me listening to other people telling me that I could never amount to anything but a dishwasher. It's those stories that really make me who I am, that really made me really drive even further to go to college, because people were expecting me to fail. It was a story really of me meeting the dishwasher when I graduated college, and that dishwasher telling me, Cesar, you cannot come back here because you have a college degree. You need to fight for us, because they believed in me. And like many of you all, you know, I don't have to share my experience of me going to law school, because I'm sure you all are living it now. But you know, it's no different from not sleeping well, being terrified of my first year. It also means kind of, you know, gaining a few pounds because I'm reading every day. But it's really my experience as sharing the same experience as my college, because that's who I am. I'm no different than many of my friends who amazingly supported me along the way. And we have one of my great colleagues from CUNY Law School that really means so much. And even though I had to commute maybe 3 hours each way, so that was like 6 hours from my home to my law school, it meant because I needed to fight even harder because of so many people meant to me. But as I was mentioning, the story is not just about dreamers, not just about the students. It's about the stories of our families, because we didn't just come here and all, and you see in Congress, pretty much Democrats and Republicans elevating the stories of dreamers that, oh, dreamers, they're so cute, these kids, blah, 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 and blame the parents, it's their fault. Well, it's not their fault. It's not. I never will blame my mother, and I will fight to ensure that no one blames my mother, as well as fighting for those workers who literally kept me focused to continue to school, because they saw me as their advocate, and that's who I want to become. Whether I'm there yet, who knows, but I do know that those stories is what keeps me alive. And really that brings us into understanding the legal issues, because within those stories, when we read cases, we outline as thinking like lawyers, find the legal issues. What does that mean? What is that legal issue pertaining to? And from the DREAM Act to immigration in general to agriculture, we face all those issues. And of course now we have the issue of, particularly the issue of undocumented lawyers. When I graduated, I was excited. It was a bittersweet moment, of course, but at the same time knowing that it was a dead end for me, pretty much. Regardless of the endless sleepless nights, regardless of the endless commute, my law degree was, in essence, according to what people said, maybe worthless. Without the DREAM Act, I was relegated to a shadow. But within that experience, I saw other amazing dreamers who inspired me, that they were out there fighting for their education, fighting for my education. And knowing that those students were out there, and knowing that those allies were out there. So it was not just undocumented students. It was you all fighting alongside us. And that is what made the difference now, and that is what makes the difference now. So 2 years ago, well, a year ago pretty much, I graduated law school, took the tormenting New York State bar, and fortunately passed it in my first try. It was definitely an experience that you all will get there, let's just say that. It was definitely an amazing experience knowing that I passed, but again, it was what's next. Pretty much, it was still the same dead end that I faced. But I think what we have learned from many of dreamers, and what I have met from so many great friends and professors and lawyers, is that we need to be creative in what we do, creative in the way we advocate, creative in what it means to be a lawyer. Being a lawyer doesn't necessarily mean being in a courtroom. It means primarily to be an advocate, an activist for your community, for your client. And soon after, well, pretty much I worked with other dreamers, and we pretty much got together and formed a dreamer lobbying group that would pretty much be organized to do more political and aggressive advocacy at the local, state, and federal level, to do electoral politics, to do policy politics, to lobby. Let me tell you that I would have never thought in my first year I would be meeting with the Speaker of the House, meeting with Senator Durbin, with the Majority Leader, meeting the President, lobbying them and talking about them. I would never expected that. But here I am, really growing as a lawyer, growing as a person, and growing because, not just because I'm out there fighting or whatever you want to call it, it's because I am meeting great people who are fighting alongside. And that is you all, and that's all the friends at my school, all the friends that I have met throughout the way, all the amazing lawyers that I have met that have continued to mentor me and say, you will one day be, with a licensed lawyer. And that brings the issue of stories. And those stories really inform the policy issues. And we're obviously seeing the immigration debate taking an amazing turn, from Republicans pretty much calling the DREAM Act a nightmare act, calling undocumented immigrants criminals, illegals, pretty much associating and passing state immigration laws to really target minority communities, Latinos, regardless of whether they're undocumented or not. We have in Arizona, many of from what I hear, many people from Arizona here, citizens being detained because of how they look. And this is something that's happening. And so these issues really bring up countless legal issues that Professor Campbell and Mr. Rivero will bring up and discuss in a few more details. But currently now, my case, like many cases with the Dream Bar Association, the issue of whether I can be a licensed lawyer is something that New York State has never confronted, an issue that California has never confronted, and Florida as well. And in Florida, with Sergio Garcia in California, and Jose Godinez in Florida, their cases now is before the state Supreme Court to really address the issue, because as I was mentioning to Jan and before, and pretty much the judiciary was, hands off on immigration. It was Congress and the president dealing with that. Well, now we pretty much tangled up the judiciary and said, well, you have to deal with immigration. And we're seeing in the Supreme Court addressing it, we're seeing state courts addressing immigration, and obviously for our purposes is whether New York State or the New York State Bar and whether the New York Court of Appeals, our highest court, will say, yes, Mr. Vargas, you can be a licensed lawyer regardless of your status. The question is still before them. From what I hear, last time I heard was really encouraging. They actually called me and said, Mr. Vargas, we don't know who you are, but we're very proud of you because I am one of the person reviewing and I'm an immigrant, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make this happen. Who knows what that means, but it was very encouraging to hear that, especially that to know again that we're not alone, that it's an effort by public interest leaders, public interest lawyers here now that will resume this fight. And we're going to continue to press forward. The Dream Action Coalition, the organization that we work with, and the lobbying firm that we work with, we're working in Ohio, we're working across the country. I was actually just back from Ohio, Arizona, DC. I'm heading back to Texas, back to New York, and then back to Florida. So I'm going to be traveling a lot. But again, it's because we need to get this done, and we need to get this done together. We need to get this done as pretty much as people, as lawyers who really care about this issue. And now, I didn't want to touch too much on the legal issues because I want to address this with Professor Campbell and Mr. Rivero, as well as with you all, because these legal issues are not legal issues that are pretty much abstract. They are my life, but they're also legal issues that will affect you as public interest lawyers, issues that will define how the country moves on, especially with the immigration debate going on. And we're going to continue to see how this develops. We're going to continue mostly Republicans flipping and now saying they support the immigration reform for whatever purposes, mostly because of the Latino vote. But it's a dialogue that's changing. It's a dialogue that we are seeing really bring significant change. But as we have learned from history, from amazing activists, from Martin Luther King to amazing women activists, change does not come by being a spectator. Change comes from being active, from taking action, and from being a player. And I hope you all can join us as we move forward this conversation, because we are definitely in need of amazing public interest law students, and hope to see you all as public interest lawyers. Thank you.
Okay, let's really pick up where Cesar left off, and the message there is stories about people, right? And this is a public interest-oriented law school, so I'm just going to take a wild stab in the dark and assume that you're all interested in the public interest, in people. That's what that means. And you came here because you really care about people. That's what I think this environment means to you all. But you're also learning to be lawyers. And lawyers are taught primarily to think and use certain thinking skills. So I know it's nice and very heartwarming to have very fuzzy human stories to discuss, but I want to park those for a minute because we need to focus on the tools that lawyers use, and that is identifying issues and arguing legal issues within a system that is ultimately, at least as we see it in this environment, designed to help people. So how many folks, I just want to get a sense of how many of you are either in a constitutional law class or took a constitutional law class? Oh, good, we have a decent number of folks here. All right, for those of you currently in constitutional law class, you might go back to your professor and say, look, can I get extra credit for the discussion that you participated in today? Because we're going to be looking at separation of powers, preemption, issues that are probably familiar to those of you who took courses in constitutional law. And, but first, really want to start with a basic question and approach it from the not very sophisticated point of view of the person on the street. And what I mean by that is the following question. If someone does not have a legal right to work in the United States, then why should that person receive a license to practice law? That's the essential question before us today. And of course, lawyers being lawyers, it's our job to start parsing out and getting very sophisticated in order to identify the legal issues that are hidden inside of that question, and how we can have a discussion today to lay out a possible course for the future in addressing this issue. So I'd like to go ahead and just plant that question squarely in front of our good professor here, and see where she takes it just at first blush. This very common sense question before us.
Thank you. Well, like most legal questions, right, it's not as simple as it seems, right, at first blush. It's a good question though, and I think it's one that, maybe a soundbite question, right, exactly, right? If you don't have, it kind of reminds me of what part of the legal don't you understand, right?
Right.
Right? Because it doesn't really get to the heart of what we're talking about here. And I'm going to go ahead and say that I'm very much on the same page as Cesar with immigration law and policy. I think this is about stories and about people and their lives. And I teach a clinic, so my students and my former students know that a big theme of my course is storytelling, and how storytelling is a huge part of being an advocate. Again, what Cesar said about how being an activist and an advocate is, I think, at the heart of being a lawyer. But at the same time, Fernando's right that we've got some serious constitutional questions going on here about what rights and privileges are afforded to people that are not lawfully present in the United States, meaning people that don't have immigration status. The term of art would be people that are called aliens, which is the legal term for people that are non-citizens, that is in the INA, the Immigration and Nationality Act. It's an intentionally, derogatory term, right? Aliens, not one of us, not part of us, not part of a membership group of citizens. And citizens do have different rights and privileges than aliens by virtue of our law, the plenary power that Congress and the President have over the immigration laws. And then what does that mean for the states? Can states enact their own immigration laws? The Supreme Court weighed in on that pretty clearly this past term in the Arizona case. But the very specific question we have here is, do you have a right to practice law when you've passed a bar? Is it a character and fitness issue? I mean, I really see, besides the work authorization issue, is there some kind of character and fitness question about being undocumented? Are you a lawbreaker? Is there some kind of moral or character, public danger element to giving a license to practice law to somebody, even if you presume that for something like DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, someone has work authorization now, well then, if you were present without status for many years, does that somehow impact on your character and fitness to practice law? All of you will have to go through this when you become attorneys, and you're going to show that you're not a danger to the public. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's an easy answer to the question, but that's the kind of stuff you have to think about. It's not just, again, about the Constitution. It certainly is about the Constitution. It's about the police powers of the states as well. But it is also, again, about what does it mean for these individuals who've worked very hard? Do they have a right to earn a living? That's something that you think about all the time when you think of immigration. Is working a crime? It's not. Are there laws against undocumented people working? Sure, on the employer side, but you still can't, you have to pay somebody for working for you. Slavery is illegal. So, but do you have a right, does an alien have a right to have a license? I guess we'll find out.
Yes, and actually, we've got two things, this is what lawyers do, they parse out, that need to be parsed out. And on the one hand, we have the issue of receiving a license, and we have to understand that is distinct from earning income, okay? And so this, really, the starting point, or at least, I guess as a footnote for everyone, we need to know that Cesar is in the company of 3 people right now, at least if you hear the, if you see the media reports, who are in that situation. There's a gentleman in California, a gentleman in Florida, and Cesar is a gentleman in New York, undocumented law students who have graduated law school, passed the bar exam, have applied to their respective state bars. The cases in Florida and in California are actually in active litigation. The respective state bar, the Bar of California and the Bar of Florida, when presented with these applications, said, well, what do? They've asked their highest court for essentially an opinion on what to do with these applicants. And it is in the context of those cases that these issues are being parsed out. Let's start with the California case, which was the first case. And the starting point, as I understand it, is the whole receiving of a license. Move aside the question of actually receiving income, of working, okay? And so we have this whole discussion about what is a state function as opposed to what is a federal function. And here we implicate the 10th Amendment. And we're looking at those areas of American life that are not really addressed in the Constitution, are the state's business, not the federal government's business. And historically, licensing people to work in a state has been a state function, right? And so here we have that discussion. I want to pull that aside for just a moment and see whether you think that that is a sufficiently valid distinction, or whether we're just splitting hairs here, because what really matters is getting that money, right? Because that's how I phrase the question, is if someone does not have a legal right to work in the United States, why should that person receive a license to practice law? In my question, I'm not saying why should that person practice law. The question is, why should that person receive a license to practice law? So let me get your thoughts a little bit on that starting point, which is the question of receiving a license first.
I mean, when I think about whether or not a person has an is it an entitlement to a license? I guess that's how it would be seen. Are you entitled to have a license? And is that squarely within the right of a state, right, to say who can and can't be licensed in their jurisdiction? I mean, when you think of other professions, the medical profession is the one I can think of off the top of my head. I mean, every state has their own medical licensing boards. I mean, so all states have their own professional licensing boards for lawyers and stuff too. But I mean, I know, for example, the nursing boards, the National Nursing Board doesn't require proof of legal status, but then the licensing, just to take the board, but then the issue of whether or not you can be licensed goes to the state. I mean, taking the employment part aside from it, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of questions in there about, what is the right? And is it a right? Is it a privilege? Is it an entitlement? I think when you think about that, that's a hard question, right? What is a license to practice law, right? Because, like you said, it's intertwined with the idea of employment, and there are federal laws regarding who can be employed lawfully, and then there are state laws about
mean, the Whiting case, which was the case that I was involved in when I worked at MLDF at the, it was a Supreme Court case, but I worked on it at the Ninth Circuit. That's about Arizona's state employer law. The Supreme Court upheld that. That's a licensing law. That's a business licensing law. It was called business death penalty because what it did is it revokes the business licenses of organizations that are employing undocumented immigrants. You know, the Supreme Court said pretty clearly that that's a state function. If they want to go ahead and you know, revoke the license of people to operate businesses in the state of Arizona because they haven't done what they said they did, then they can do that. So I think that's probably the closest corollary to this licensing issue. And the argument for states having the ability to set whatever parameters they want on that, at least in this area. But I think you need to think first about what is a license to practice law, and then try to figure out how it fits within the state and federal dynamic of immigration.
Okay, all right, and that's a fair point to make. What is the legal nature of a license? Is it a privilege, in which case you're not really entitled to it, or is it a right? When you're looking at the license to practice law, you're looking at the fact that you're not automatically going to be a lawyer if you graduate from law school or even pass the bar exam, because it is the highest court of the state that gets to say, you're not fit. You have very poor character, notwithstanding the years of schooling and the money spent and the study and the passing. So on the one hand, it does not appear to be a right. And certainly, and even if you have the license, it is subject to loss because of bad conduct. On the other hand, and this is an issue that is being raised in the California case, it is an argument that is used in both the California and Florida cases, and that is not so much a right that is at stake, but another constitutional provision, which is a contract clause of the Constitution. The Constitution says that Congress isn't going to get involved in laws that prevent people from engaging in contractual affairs. And the argument raised at this point is not so much that I've got a right to be a lawyer, but I went to law school, I spent all this money, I engaged in a contract with law schools. And law schools engage in a contract with me, and the implied promise of that contract is you'll get to apply for a law license. You should receive a law license, all other things being equal, right? And those all other things being equal, I think, are related to something else that you mentioned, and what you mentioned was when you were distinguishing between the professions that are state licenses, often something important to look at are what are the requirements and the qualifications. Well, a footnote to drop here is that the state's various agencies in the executive branch license many professionals like doctors and nurses. But lawyers are licensed by the judiciary, another branch of government within the state. And so looking at what applications the courts fill out for, create for the applicants, it would be interesting to note whether from the very beginning they have these requirements. You must be a citizen, you must have this or that. And the arguments being raised by the people who raised that contract theory is that we did everything we were supposed to do. You engaged in a contractual relationship with me and you never required that I be a citizen. Many of these applications, in fact, don't have that requirement. So I want to go ahead and ask Cesar about your particular experience in filling out that torturous application. What sorts of requirements did you see? Were you put on notice, or did you do everything you had to do as both the applicants in California and in Florida are arguing, and therefore see no reason why your status should be something that's an impediment now?
And I think the great distinction we just made now was the licensing of certain professions like teachers, dentists, medical doctors, or even cutting hair, being a barber. A lot of those licensing are issued by state agencies that, for example, a teacher. I actually was thinking about becoming a teacher at one point. But I did actually look into the application, and there was a legal requirement to have certain legal status in there. So, at that instance, it was like, okay, I may not become a teacher. The question is here now on that licensing of lawyers is pretty much the sphere of the judiciary of the highest court of the state. In my case, it's the Court of Appeals. As I mentioned before, when pretty much confronting the issue of, in my first year, my 1L year, I called up the character and fitness and to address the issue, and pretty much it was for them, the response was like, I have no idea what to do. I have never been confronted with that issue. And that really brings the issue of and what Fernando's going to bring up is the question of whether in the California Supreme Court, the Department of Justice actually submitted a brief in opposition to the application of Sergio Garcia, because according to them, under I won't say the whole name, but there's an act pretty much said that state agencies cannot grant any license to undocumented immigrants. And then really that brought the issue. Their interpretation was that the state Supreme Court, that should be a co-equal branch of government, is a state agency for that purposes. And that really brings the issue of whether that is actually true. And kind of bringing the application, when I submitted that, over 40 pages of submitting the application, there was no instance. It was just pretty much what is your status, and that's pretty much it. There is no handbook. If you look into the New York State Department of Character and Fitness, you pretty much have the requirements, which is graduated law school, graduated, pass the New York State bar exam, have a good moral character, and that's it. That was the only notice given to anyone who is interested in applying for a law license. And at that instance, where are we heading that from? Should and the question is, should the federal government now have a say into the regulation of lawyers in a sphere that has been traditionally, before the Constitution, a sphere of the state government?
All right, and so here we come to, we touched lightly on the separation of powers, and here's where we come to the real preemption issue. And of course, Cesar highlighted it by mentioning the argument by the Obama administration that was submitted in the California case. And there was the back and forth between the California Attorney General and the Obama administration, because the California Attorney General supported the applicant in that case. And essentially, the Obama administration said, look, we have a statute that says you cannot give a public benefit to an undocumented individual, and that includes professional licenses. If the license is issued by a state agency, or if it's the product of appropriated funds, in other words, tax dollars. And the opposing side came back with the argument of, well, a court is a court. It's not a state agency. And also, we've got, law licenses that are paid for through fees. The applicant pays a fee for the license. So these Obama administration arguments aren't going to go very far. And of course, the Obama administration then countered with, the courts are funded through appropriated funds. So it's a two-pronged approach that the statute takes. It's not just that we're talking about state agencies, it's just also looking at analyzing the public benefit from the point of view of whether it's a product of appropriated funds. Yes, the licensing aspect of it is covered by fees, but unless they're charging fees that covers the salaries of all the court personnel, which of course is not the case, then it looks like the Obama administration has a very strong point to make here. And on this back and forth, I wanted to see what your impressions was of this particular argument.
I mean, I think their argument goes back to what I was saying. But what is a law license, right? I mean, is it an entitlement? I mean, that's exactly what the Obama administration is arguing. When you say public benefit, or their argument is that an agency, a state agency, can't give public benefits under a federal statute. That's an entitlement. That's another word for an entitlement. So that goes back to, what is the law license? It's not an entitlement. Is it a privilege? it's not a right. I mean, I think that if I were gonna categorize it, I would disagree with the administration's categorization of it as a benefit, a public benefit. I do think it's a privilege. I think, to me, it's more of a, I mean, I think the contract theory is very interesting to me, and I haven't read all the briefing in the California case, but I know that there was a specific, California Constitution has a very specific contract clause that has been used successfully, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think, you know, your question of whether there was notice, to me, it seems more of the good moral character stuff when you get down to it. But anyway, I think that this nature, this question of, right, what is a law license? Does the nature of the judiciary regulating it make it different? Are all these arguments about appropriations and funding, does that make it a benefit, and is it preempted by federal law? I mean, all of the Supreme Court cases, all of the federal cases right now that have to do with this conflict between state and federal regulation of immigration law has to do with this preemption, right? And who's the big dog here, right? I mean, can the federal government come in and crush the states on preemption because of their plenary power? And so now it's in this very interesting, you know, unfortunately for people like Cesar, it's impacting their lives. It's this categorization of what is this in the nature of immigration law, which again is a plenary function, but and how can the states regulate it? But now this question of what is the law license in particular? It's like I said, it's unprecedented. We'll find out. Nobody knows right now.
So that is a good distinction also to make. The Obama administration does appear to imply that a law license would be an entitlement because it's a public benefit. On the other hand, I can tell you from my own personal experience, I take licenses away from people, and I have to argue as a civil prosecutor that people don't have a property right or an entitlement to a license, and there's plenty of case law, at least in the District of Columbia, but of course in the rest of the country, that supports that. So there appears to be a little internal contradiction there, and it would be interesting to see how the highest court, or if they even identify the weakness, the possible weakness in that argument.
Well, I think it's the difference between like I said, what's a privilege versus an entitlement. It's certainly a licensed practice law is a privilege, right? Because like you said, I mean, anybody can take the bar. That doesn't mean they're going to get licensed if they can't meet the requirements. So that's my thing. I think you're right. There's a distinction there. An entitlement to me is different than a privilege.
I want to cut in very quickly to the last item I want to hit because I'd like to leave plenty of time for questions. And that is the Obama administration's policy of deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA, as you folks call it, because we love acronyms. And in fact, I raised it because one of the two cases, particularly the Florida case, saw the situation of the court itself thinking, well, if you got approval under DACA, and if you got basically a work permit, wouldn't this problem just go away? And the court even considered delaying its decision, which shows you that it was at least somewhat sympathetic, until the person in question got that permit under DACA to work. And so the first thing I'd like to address, of course, is your own personal experience with DACA, and I'm going to take a real wild guess, and I think you probably applied, right?
Yes.
Yeah, of course you did. You were probably the first in line. And where you are with that, and then I'd like your impression as to whether DACA would in fact resolve the problem.
Actually, I wish I would have been the first one to apply. I actually applied maybe like 4 months after, but I just recently got approved like 3 days ago, which was as crazy as it sounds like. And I told Fernando I actually can't wait to stand in the DMV line, which is I'm sure you all haven't had that experience. But so yeah, that's in Florida, when the issue of DACA came up, the Supreme Court said that, well, we may even consider a different type of license that will be temporarily while he has some type of status. And that complicates the whole issue on can undocumented lawyers work? Well, now I have DACA and I can legally work. Does this still allow me the privilege, the right of a license? And I guess the question also that complicates this is, before we get to the licensing, is the 3 steps to becoming a licensed lawyer is, school, bar, and but also character and fitness review. That's the question is whether, and as some groups have argued, that because I am in the country unauthorized or illegally, that goes into my character, that how can I, like someone like me, uphold the Constitution or the law because of that? And that's pretty much a preeminent question that the courts or the state bars are confronting, whether that goes into my character and fitness. And so I think that's also a threshold issue before we actually get to the license that, yes, you cannot, you're not guaranteed a law license after you graduate and pass the bar. But if you do have the character and fitness, what is the character and fitness question? It really comes up on that.
Yeah, I mean, what Cesar just said is why the DACA issue doesn't solve the problem. I mean, it does in terms of if you're concerned about can you legally work, sure, but even then, it's only a temporary situation. I mean, I think, those of you that are familiar with DACA know that it's not a law, it's not a statute, it's not even a reg, it's a memo, right? It's a stopgap. It's the quick fix for what couldn't happen with the DREAM Act. As Fernando said, if the DREAM Act didn't pass, we wouldn't be here. So right, it becomes this question of what is good moral character? Again, a term of art that you see in immigration law is a matter of statutory interpretation, but also for all of us. Again, I said character and fitness when you apply to get your license. So what does that mean? And this question, Cesar's right, that's the argument that's made, is that if someone is undocumented or has been unlawfully present or is a lawbreaker, from the extremist groups, how can you expect them to uphold the Constitution? And that is the question that makes the DACA solution not a solution to the problem. I mean, I think that reasonable minds can disagree about whether that's a valid concern. I tend to think that it's kind of a hyperbolic argument, but because people get admitted to the bars of various states all the time, who truly are lawbreakers, right? People that have committed felonies. So it's an individualized assessment. I don't think that something like unlawful presence should knock someone out is a matter of law or a matter of policy. But because of that, the DACA issue is not a solution to this question.
Great. Well, I have on my list, fairness issues, equity. I've got the political aspect of all this. I've got the promise of Plyler versus Doe. I've got a couple of other things. And we can go on for another half hour, 45 minutes, but this will be a good point for us to stop. Thank our panelists and open it up to questions for everybody. So, any questions? I'm going to give you sufficient time. It looks like we've got a microphone over here, or, you have a question?
Sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you. I hail from New York City as well, and I just wanted to thank you for coming and sharing your story. There's two things. Fred Quinones, who I don't know if you're familiar with him, he is a medical doctor at Johns Hopkins, a brain surgeon, who was an undocumented immigrant. And his story is on the website of Johns Hopkins. And the thing is that I'm wondering if he went through the same type of struggle, because I don't know what the criteria is for becoming a medical doctor, but he was undocumented, and he became a brain surgeon at Johns Hopkins, and he's contributing to his community. The other thing is the issue of immigration has been painted as a Latino issue solely, and I'm not going to say if, but when the DREAM Act is passed, because I do believe that it is going to pass. The Latino community is not the only community that's going to benefit from it. I mean, there are African immigrants, people from the Caribbean, Eastern Europe, Asia, etc. In fact, when they had the March for Immigrants' Rights in 2006, it played out characteristic of what the issues were in each city. In New York, where I come from, there were people from Africa, Asia, Latin America, etc. So that being said, is there an effort to build coalitions with many of these other communities who are clearly going to benefit from the DREAM Act? Lastly, I was at a conference a couple of months back that CASA Maryland did, integrating immigration, which was a powerful conference. And you know, the issue around coalition building was very much a factor, particularly in our workshops. And I think that this is something that needs to be done, building coalitions, because the Latino community is not the only community that's going to benefit from the DREAM Act.
Yes, to the story with the brake surgeon, and I think that was a very powerful story. There was definitely a difference between, he actually was able to adjust before 2001. There was, I think, he married and under immigration was 245I, which pretty much, if you came into the country, pretty much like you crossed the border, you could adjust your status, but only if you pay a fine. That statute got repealed or was not extended. So it was definitely different scenario there. But then coalition building, let me give you a perfect example, and you know, really the way the advocacy has really brought me great experiences, and now in understanding of Native American law. For example, in Arizona, there's when SB 1070 pretty much got enacted, the Navajo tribes and a lot of Native Americans actually, they're not abided by state law, nor perhaps even federal, I guess. And pretty much they said, we're not going to enforce SB 1070 in our sovereignty. And that was a very powerful coalition to have the Native Americans stand up to pretty much a lot of the anti-immigrant rhetoric. And you're right, I was actually in the Maryland, I was actually speaking at the Maryland conference, and we are seeing an amazing group, and we have not only Asian, African American, but we have Irish immigrants, Italian immigrants, undocumented immigrants. We have Canadian immigrants. Justin Bieber may be undocumented, who knows? So
it's just important to not let those people who are opposed this to paint it as one particular group, because we're much more powerful when we come together.
Yeah, and you know, there's actually a really great strong coalition of the Black Latino coalition, the Asian immigrant community is organized in a way that hasn't been pretty much like they have been coming like, because it's also different culturally, because in the Asian community, having an undocumented status is kind of frowned upon. So a lot of the youth haven't gotten active, but until recently we have seen an amazing activity and coalition building of strategic alliances between all these groups that we are seeing in April 10 actually, and May Day, we're going to see national efforts across the country in hundreds of cities across the country, where we're going to have not only Latinos, but also we're going to have all these groups really marching together, and it's going to be very powerful. And as I was mentioning before, we have seen an unprecedented level of activism by not just the activists or the advocates, but by the community. And that's because, as we have seen, an amazing interest as well as empowerment of this issue.
And this is where activism and advocacy and messaging, right, leads to take root in this issue. I think when you see the Dreamers have taken a page from the civil rights movement of the 60s in terms of civil disobedience and the walking and the marches, and you know, the reframing the issue of immigrants' rights as a civil right, as a human right, is very, very important for coalition building. And I think also the other movement that I think the immigrants' rights movement can take a page from is the LGBT marriage equality movement as well. I mean, all that, I mean, this is all stuff that we need to bundle it up again. Like I said, it's not just about immigrants' rights. It's not just about Latino rights or Asian rights. It's about human rights and civil rights. And so that's a very, very important part of messaging in this movement.
Any other questions? We don't see no questions. Oh, we've got some questions over here. I think we need to have somebody running around with the mic.
Yes, let me done.
Thank you, Cesar, for your bravery. I think he's very modest. Cesar is very modest, and I went to law school with Cesar, and you know, it was about 2 years into law school that I learned about Cesar's status, and you know, but throughout law school, he was just one of the most hardworking persons there. He traveled 3 hours or however long, each way, every day to go to school, and was just so impressive. And just as a person, it's just been great having that, going through that experience with him. And I was just thinking about your what you just said about building coalitions, and I was thinking about the Dred Scott decision that said that people of African descent were not citizens at the time and didn't have a stand-in to sue in court. And so we've had these arbitrary categorizations of who has a right to be a citizen and to reap the benefits of this society. And I think definitely it's time for people to realize or to understand their common oppression, their common struggles. I guess part of my story that Cesar knows is that I also was undocumented and come from an undocumented immigrant community in New York as well. West Indians, I grew up among Black undocumented people. And when people look at me, they don't see or think immediately that's an illegal immigrant. I speak English, that's my first and only official language. And I was able to, pass through the education system, just like Cesar. But I guess that's part of my coming out story as well. I was fortunate enough to adjust my status and to, no longer dream for the for the American life, but to live it. And so I'm privileged in that sense. But I just want to, applaud you, Cesar, for continuing to, highlight your struggle, our struggle, and just keep on keeping on.
I think over here on the other side, you had a question, I thought? On this side, please.
Raise your hands again.
Thank you very much, everyone who put on the event and the panelists. I'm actually an alumni of CHCI. I used to intern at Malbec. I'm here representing the United Auto Workers, and I actually just started with them yesterday. I'll be taking over their immigration portfolio. So what I want to hear from you all is what do you all want to see done on behalf of big labor? What are your recommendations as grassroots advocates and civil rights organizations? The Hispanic bar. What are some of the action items that you all would like to see as we move forward and continue forging these coalitions?
Okay, let me just very quickly take it from the Hispanic bar's angle, since that was part of the question. The Hispanic Bar Association of the District of Columbia is an affiliate of the national, but as such, we're focused on the District of Columbia. So we do have a legislative policy and issues committee. We monitor District of Columbia legal issues, and we advocate with respect to those. Notwithstanding that, of course, I think once a year we send a letter to Congress saying, here's our wish list for comprehensive immigration reform. But the main driver for those changes is the Hispanic National Bar Association, and every year they have in May a legislative day where they go and they do some lobbying. We collaborate, but it's really an HMBA project. For years and years, the HMBA, of course, has put the DREAM Act on that list. This year's going to be a little bit different. HMBA has started a different committee on comprehensive immigration reform as a result of all the action that we have been seeing lately. Not to be confused with my little committee, which is all about grassroots efforts with respect to highlighting the DREAM Act. So at that level, at the comprehensive immigration reform level, the HMBA is not just doing this on their own, they're reaching out to other like-minded groups. legal organizations and national advocacy organizations. I do think that it would be wise not to expect real change to happen solely based on what these groups do at the national level, because a lot of what we've seen the changes has to do with numbers and people coming out in great numbers. There's a purpose for marches, even though the march in and of itself may not convince legislators to change their minds. It's not an either-or proposition. We have to attack this problem from multiple directions. So on the one hand, I think it's good that we have professional organizations like the HBA-DC doing some work, the HMBA doing some work, but they're not going to get 10,000 people on the street. They're not structured like that. In that regard, it's interesting to see what the Obama campaign did recently in drawing all of these various constituencies together in terms of coalition building. This statement, of course, is not to be construed as an endorsement of the Obama campaign or the Obama administration in any way, shape, or form. I'm just merely observing, because you're talking about, there was a question here about the efforts and what can we expect to see. We can expect to see greater coalition building. For my part, we can expect to see greater agreement on the DREAM Act. However, and this is a big caution and a footnote I'm talking about here, because it looks like legislators on both sides of the aisle are agreeing to these set of principles, and Obama saying this is great. And so there's a lot of talk about the big picture and how things work. If you notice, for instance, statements that Obama makes about what he expects to see in this reform, and even the senators themselves, there's no real highlight on the DREAM Act. It's simply assumed. And the danger with that is that inevitably, when the breakdown comes in communication, and it will, there will be a breakdown in communication. What you don't want then is to have the DREAM Act scuttled again, because there cannot be agreement on the greater issues about what to do with the status of adults who were never intended to be the recipients of the DREAM Act. How do you, in fact, secure the border? Because that is unfortunately one of the elements of this bipartisan agreement. We can have all these great kumbaya, beautiful changes to our immigration system, but of course they are dependent on securing the border. And how does that really work out? Democrats seem to think that the mechanism for making that happen is an advisory mechanism. Republicans seem to think, no, we're going to have an actual commission, and they get to actually say the border is now officially secure, notwithstanding the fact, of course, that Janet Napolitano recently testified before Congress saying, well, it's basically secure, right, the border. So, so I expect to see something moving forward with the DREAM Act, but not because it's going to be something that is the result of a natural progression in the political conversation. It's going to have to be the result of people like me and my little groups continuing to work, folks on the street continuing to work, the national groups continuing to work. So at a minimum, I'm looking at the DREAM Act. We're probably looking at some temporary worker program, which probably won't make everybody happy. But I'm not going to stick my neck out here and say that the problems are all going to be solved, because I think there's going to be a breakdown in communication, and it's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I don't belong to a group anymore. I don't work for any organizations anymore. I'm a law professor, and so the beauty of that is I get to really say what I think. And I tend to agree with Fernando that there's going to be a breakdown in the one thing I want everyone to remember is that Obama has deported more people than any president in history. He's looking at 2 million deportations right now. And the focus on, what I want people to focus on when the communication does break down is, I want them to think about the people that Cesar was talking about. The dishwashers, his mother, the people that are not the feel-good immigrant stories like the Dreamers, right? I mean, the Dreamers are obviously very deserving and wonderful people that should and have fought and have led the challenge for immigration reform comprehensively. But the people that are going to get caught or lost are deserving as well. And so I want that to be part of the conversation. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, whatever comprehensive immigration reform comes up, I will not be happy with, because that's just who I am. But I I want that to be part of the conversation about people that are deserving in other ways, people that sacrifice for their children, the parents of the dreamers, the moms, the dads, the families, even the so-called criminal aliens. Those are the people that we represent in our clinic here, and have a conversation about the contributions that all immigrants make, and what we can do, what our obligations are to them, and the part of the contributions that they give to our country, and how they're part of us as well.
And just quickly, without outlining a lot of the principles, but it's just simply whatever comes up, there's definitely movement from the Judiciary Committee in the House, which is surprisingly we have met with the Speaker, and that has been surprisingly inviting how he has been welcoming the discussion on immigration. But I think one of the major things that we want, obviously, workers' rights, but also importantly is the issue of what Fernando was mentioning, the border security issue. There's been, saying, oh, we need to secure the border, but what does that actually mean? And, we've actually been working with organizations and communities in the border states, in Tucson, San Diego, El Paso, and a lot of these communities who can attest to the actual nature of the border. And, obviously there is instances, but overwhelmingly, the focus has been on listening to what politicians have to say about the border versus what is the reality there. There's countless reports already indicating how the border is more secure, the cities have been insecure. So it's pretty much not necessarily a principle, but the principle and to not get it lost in the midst of a breakdown, a possible, or hopefully not, but a possible breakdown. We don't want to repeat what Senator Schumer did in 2007, where he pretty much passed $600 billion in enforcement-only legislation. If anything comes up, it has to address the issue, not necessarily just put money in border. So I think that's something that at least we're working on with the Dreamers to really focus on that, to ensure that the border security issue is actually addressed in a way that addresses the reality, not what Senator McCain, not what Steve King from Iowa says. So it's pretty much on that.
Right, and that's life in these United States. The issue of immigration is incredibly complicated. By the way, I don't want anyone to also just get the impression that some sort of Obama detractor either. I can criticize the president, but I understand also that the president is in a difficult position. Again, because immigration is not cut and dry, it's not black and white. It's quite complicated, and we can go on about it for another hour discussing it and taking questions, but we are, I believe, out of time. We do have a reception, students, free food. And I welcome you all to engage us and ask us questions at the reception. We'd be more than happy to speak with all of you today. Thank you so much for your time here.
Everybody to the reception, that was what I was going to do. And we do have some closing announcements. The first announcement is that the National Lawyers Guild Mid-Atlantic Conference is going to be here at UDC on March 16th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. You're all invited. And Aisha will conclude the program. Thank you.
So once again, can we get a round of applause for our panelists? And like Jen mentioned, just a few closing announcements. I know everyone wants to get to the food. I know, free food. We're all law students. But I do want to introduce a couple of attorneys who are here from HBADC. We have Jocelyn Nieva and also Ms. Antoinette Brosset from the Student Affairs Committee, and we'll start with Jocelyn, and she will talk to you students about a fellowship opportunity, and then Antoinette will speak to you about HBADC and its benefits to law students.
Thank you very much. Some of you have seen me before. I come every year to DC School of Law, UDC School of Law, to announce the Hispanic Bar Association of DC Foundation's Summer Public Interest Fellowship. That's the hat I'm wearing today. This is a great opportunity between we have two fellowships, $5,000 and $10,000 for summer public interest work, which I understand all of you guys are committed to doing anyway. Last summer, we had students working at MALDEF on the DREAM Act litigation, so you can make a big difference and get a really nice fellowship. to support your work. The fellowship brings not just funding, but mentoring, exposure, all sorts of good opportunities. So please look at the HBADC.org website. The application is there, the announcement is there. If you have any questions, please let someone from is it the Voces Jurídicas? Is that, what do you call it? The Latino Law Students Association? Latino Law Students. When I was here, it was when I was a student here, and when I won the HBADC Foundation Summer Public Interest Fellowship, it was Voces Jurídicas. But look, get the information, apply. It's a great fellowship, and you can have a great experience and get money for it too. So congratulations. Thanks.
Thank you, Jocelyn, and just on that note, there is a sign-in sheet that's being passed around, so if you want more information, as you've heard at the beginning, I am the president of LALSA, and if you want your name to be added to the listserv, please star your name or come and talk to me during the reception. And now I will turn it over to Antoinette.
I'm Antoinette Perez-Brose, and basically just letting you know that Hispanic Bar Association DC is a really good organization to join. I am in the Student Affairs Committee, and we have mentors for you, all of you law students. If you'd like to join the mentor-mentee program, go to our website, hbeadc.org, and we can, I don't think it's too late. I won't let Fernando say it's too late to go ahead and get a mentor. Because actually we started that about actual selection of mentor-mentees a couple of months back. But we'll see what we can do, because it's really important to have some guidance when you're a law student or a new attorney, and we would welcome you with open arms. Thank you.
All right, so once again, thank you for coming, and if you could please join us outside of New Courtroom, and we have some snacks and refreshments for you guys, for you all. Thank you.